So, about 2 years ago, I started a Fiverr gig. Now, Fiverr gets a lot of shit, there's like Fiverr versions of things, which are kind of like Walmart versions of things. Or I've even seen people like hire artists on Fiverr, ironically. I've always maintained kind of the same thing about Tinder. Like, at the end of the day, it's just, they're just people, right? Like, your reason for being on there can vary for many different reasons. So, like, sure, I'll take the joke if someone's like, the vocals on Fiverr, like, that's fine. But, like, obviously there's some talented people on Fiverr. And friends of mine kind of encouraged me to give it a shot because I have a very wide vocal range, as people watching are probably aware. Figured I'd give it a shot. I'm kind of slowing down on it now. I made a good amount of money, and I undercharged. I eventually upped my rates to the point where I wasn't taking on like 6 gigs at a time because it was really cheap. But I did learn some interesting things. Shouldn't be surprising, almost all of the gigs were metal. I did explicitly advertise metal, but I also advertised like rock and alternative vocals because really I wanted to get my clean vocals up there. And of course my clean vocals since I started 2 years ago have improved greatly, not necessarily because of that, but there were a handful of, thinking of one specific gig, that it whipped me into shape, not because, well, we'll get to that. So it was mostly metal that I was tackling, which is fine. Obviously, I'm comfortable with that. First random interesting thing is people would either have very specific requests for references of vocalists, or they would be like, why the hell would you ask that? I just want you to use whatever tone you think best, whatever one works for you. The people who were the former, over half of them would always request Randy Blythe from Lamb of God specifically. As far as people pointing out specific vocalists and being like, I want you to sound like that, out of all the people who did that, Randy Blythe was over half of those requests, which is interesting. He is a good vocalist. He has a very distinct tone. He utilizes range a lot. I suppose I get it. I think it's that over these people just fucking love Lamb of God so much that they're like, I just want to sound like Lamb of God. There was one person who was kind of like that, but yeah, that was interesting. Second, I believe, was Michael from Dark Tranquillity, which made me very happy as that is one of my favorite bands of all time, and that was a lot of fun to mimic. I think 3 people requested his vocal style, which was cool. The biggest takeaway I learned from doing all of this is how particular metal people are with phrasing and rhythms, which is kind of interesting. Like, me and Logan have joked that as a metal vocalist, not counting clean vocals, just harsh guttural screams, you're a percussionist. That's what you are, right? Because the drums are too fast and complicated. So your job as a vocalist is percussion. And we joke about that, but it's not a joke. It's true. And I was surprised by how many people didn't necessarily give a shit about the lyrics, and didn't give as much a shit about the tone as they did about the specific rhythms that they had written. Because I have a very particular way of phrasing things. I don't like starting word emphases on the upbeat because it feels wrong. I don't like when rhythms are unnecessarily dotted when they don't need to be. I have a very pragmatic and German approach to my vocal phrasings, and many of the jobs that I had, that was the biggest thing, is no, it needs to be phrased this way. And to me, when I was delivering them, it was like, this makes no sense from a phrasing perspective. Like, it doesn't work with the words that we have here, but it does specifically follow, say, the guitar groove or the snare groove. And that was interesting because that's not how I would approach it. That's not how I like to approach it, because to me, the words, like, if you're a vocalist and you're writing words, your job is to emphasize those words the best way possible. That's your job primarily, over you trying to blend in with the rest of the instruments, because the instruments are always going to blend in more than you do, right? That shouldn't necessarily be your job. You should be sacrificing musical rhythm for the lyrical prose or whatever, the lyrical patterns, to make them speakable, to make them delivered the way that you would speak the line, with that amount of emphasis. My example of that is putting the wrong emphasis, or the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And it's like, with music, that emphasis is on the downbeat. So if you were going to say the word emphasis, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, emphasis, 3, 4, because that's where it is. So when people would do like 1, 2, 3, emphasis, 2, 3, like, that's just wrong. It sounds stupid. It sounds bad, right? And I get that when it's nested within this greater sort of rhythmic motif for the vocals, some of those are going to be like that. And when you take it in as a whole, it's like, oh, the whole band is grooving in a certain way, including the vocals. And it's like, that's fine. But, like, I'm a vocalist. I don't give a shit about what you're doing because that's the vocals. So there's a lot of people who are very particular about that specific thing, which was interesting to learn. I think that was my biggest takeaway, because it's not something I've ever really thought of, because, like, yes, I write rhythmically complicated parts, but to me, there really only is, like, my way or the wrong way of doing those parts. And so, customers are always right. I'm getting paid for it. So I was doing them perfectly, but I was doing them, to me, the wrong way. I would do these phrases and then I would stop and just go like, because, like, all the emphasis was all fucked up. Everything was just, like, not how it was supposed to be structured. Another thing that I noticed, that it's kind of funny, it's kind of obvious. There is no correlation between money and talent. Some people who had amazing songs were like, okay, can I get away with using the cheapest option that you offer and do this and this and this? And a lot of the times, I'm just going to put in as many layers as I think the song needs. And unless I hate the song, I'm not going to, like, charge a ton, right? But there was that, and then there was people who had amazing songs and had money to spare. Then there was people who had also tons of money to spare, and their songs just sounded like absolute ass. And they would just, like, it just doesn't matter, just highest tier for that absolutely didn't need it. The way I structure my gig is there's 3 levels. The first level is basically just you're paying for a single track of vocals right up the middle, and I think maybe some doubles if the song needs it. The second tier is the standard one, where I'll do a main line, a double, additional auxiliary vocals, and or harmonies. And then the third tier, which is notably more expensive, is I will do all of that shit, but then also I will do alternate styles of all of the main line. So I'm essentially recording the song 3 times over. I'll do the entire song in, like, one distinct style, and I'll do it in a completely different style. I'll have every conceivable harmony that I think sounds good quad tracked. I'll do some parts if I think it works both harsh and clean, right? And, like, some people would send, like, absolute, like, ass garbage garage demos, and be like, most expensive one, please. And it's like, there's no way that this like garbage, not to a click, messy recording is going to need 8 layers of harmony, right? Like, it just doesn't. And I thought that was interesting because like I kind of just assumed the people who would pay more would have the better songs. And there was a lot of that because obviously you have to think like the people who are real professional about it, they're managing their finances, they're going through finding people who they think would be a good fit. They know the process. And I dealt with a couple people who were very much like that. It was like the artistry was there, but the professionalism was very much there. That it was all just kind of like said, and it was approached very much the way that I would do it. They would let me have good creative freedom, but they also knew what they were after, and the finished product sounded great. So that was interesting. Just absolutely no correlation between money and talent whatsoever, which we knew, but I had never seen it like in practice that strongly before. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Probably not unique to my process, but the fact I never talked to vocalists I don't actually know is that people would kind of assume that I would listen to the songs a bunch of times and learn them and then perform them. And it's like, sure, but no, I'm not going to do that. We're going with like the merry melodies, like, you know, Looney Tunes orchestra, where they would show up that day to work because they were full-time musicians, and they would get the score and they would run them like 8 bars at a time. So you would just sight read the thing, they'd practice it for a few minutes, everyone would get their thing, and then they would record that little section, that little sting, and then move on. And that's how they would do it. So they weren't learning these pieces start to finish a whole bunch of times. They were learning, I think it was like 4 to 8 bars at a time. Pretty sure. Maybe it was a little bit more. And that's what I do with everything. It's going to be rare that I like any of these songs enough to just sit down and jam them over and over. Like, what I'm going to be doing is just punching in vocals a few lines at a time. And what that meant was, especially for some of these gigs, there was one in mind who he had never written vocals before, but he insisted on leaving absolutely nothing to me. I had to perform it exactly the way he wanted, but he had never touched vocals in his life, which was interesting. So for those parts, I was effectively sight singing parts that no human had or ever would sing again. They were ridiculously technical, but not in the service of music. They were just technical because he didn't know what he was doing. And he had money. So, you know, what are you going to do? That album kicked my ass, and not necessarily in the rewarding, I'm so glad that's over. Well, I am glad it's over. Like, I'm not going to throw too much shade. It was just like, this one stood out because after I was done that album, I realized, holy shit, I can sing anything, because I just sang some of the most difficult melodies or technical exercises I'd ever heard for the service of not even music. Like, it was just poor writing, but I did it. I did all of it. Like, we're talking about a chorus that literally spanned 2.5 octaves within the first 10 notes. Like, not like technical in a way where it's like, oh, that's impressive. Just like technical in a way where it's like, what is this? No refinement, because again, he'd never written vocals, and I'm sure my vocals, well, okay, no, when I started out, my vocals were not that bad, but some of my parts were, and like, so I do sort of get it, but back then I would have also just deferred to the person who knew what they were doing, because the reason I did everything myself is because I didn't know anybody or reach out to anybody. So that one was a nightmare to complete, but at the end of it, I actually did come out of it a better singer. Not because I learned anything from the insane fucking melodies, but because I realized this person had thrown so many conceivable combination of notes that would never be used in music, that the notes that I come up with or that other people come up with are easy in comparison. And not only that, but I had to deliver these like with a good even vocal tone and make it sound comfortable, even though he was jumping to like literally from the very highest note of my range down to like the gothic We Are the Darkness, like in a song, in a verse. Like, it was just batshit. And again, I don't want you to picture like it was this amazing technical, like, wow, it's so musical. This wasn't like Bach, okay? This was just like, it was just a mess. Sorry, not sorry. That shit was insane. But I came out of it a stronger singer because of it. Other little interesting things I remember. One person requested this sort of high false fold dark tranquility thing, but when I delivered it, he said that the screams were too loud and that he wanted them to be softer. And I ain't never heard that before in my fucking life. And I was like, I think I can only deliver this one way, but I'll give it a shot. And it turns out that's not true at all. I actually can do those false fold screams way quieter. There actually is a decent amount of dynamic range there. Never would have come across that, because never in my life am I recording vocals and I'm just like, ah, shit, I gotta be quiet. Like, when I'm doing screams, obviously I'm doing it in daylight when nobody's trying to sleep, because they're fucking screams. They're gonna be loud. But like, no, that guy knew enough to know that he's like, you're delivering these screams too harshly. Can you tone it down? And apparently I could. I didn't even know that I could. So that was a cute, neat little thing that I learned. As far as lyrics go, I unsurprisingly learned that many metal people don't really care about lyrics. I know. Shocking. Do you know those original Few Children of Bodom albums? Like, only the singles have lyrics in the booklet, because I think he's just making up sounds for the rest of them. I'm pretty sure. I feel like in high school I looked up some of the B-sides for the lyrics and the words were just nonsense. Anyway, what was I talking about? So I went over like my gig, my levels, and the only other thing was I charged a flat $5 to write lyrics, which is dirt cheap, because even if I take half an hour to write lyrics, I'm still giving myself $10 an hour, which is undercutting, and I know that. Other than I learned that most people don't really care about what the lyrics are about, I interestingly learned that I personally cannot phone those in. I can't. Some of the best lyrical work I have ever written was for $5 on Fiverr. Which is sad. But I recently tried phoning it in and it doesn't work. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I was a writer long before I was a musician. I took an interest in creative writing when I was like 12 or younger. And I never necessarily stopped. I just slowed down once I discovered music. But I was already like, most people start playing guitar when they're like a teenager, right? And they do their stuff, and then by the time they're like in their late teens or early 20s, they're competent enough to join a band and be good, right? I don't know why we're talking about Children of Bodom today, but like Alexi was like, what, 17 or 18 when they were touring, and he was already fucking amazing, right? That was not me with music, but that was kind of me with writing. I mean, you don't like flex your writing, but I'm just saying, like, I've had like the fundamentals and I've been doing that way longer than I was doing music, by like almost a decade probably. So lyrics are never a challenge for me. I don't think my lyrics are amazing, but I think that they're definitely better than a lot of what's out there. And yeah, I learned that I cannot phone it in. So as a result, these random Fiverr gigs, some of them have like some of the most moving and succinct and not thoughtful, because this is the thing. I was trying to just scratch out some lyrics and phone it in. I was trying because it was $5. But what ended up happening was that they were very concise and very focused and very powerful. And that's really funny because I'm not just gonna, I've actually thought about just like who's gonna know if I just copied some of those lyrics, you know? Who's gonna know? I haven't, but I've thought about it because some of them are that good. So that was like an interesting thing that I learned to counteract the uninteresting thing that nobody really cares about lyrics. Some people do. I worked with one guy who wanted specifically to do like sci-fi concept albums, and I was like, "Ooh, buddy, you come to the right place." And it was really funny with him too, because I'm pretty sure English is his second language. And so he's like, I can't write lyrics. I don't know how, more or less, you know, I'm paraphrasing. And so he would come up with ideas for the songs for the overall release. And then I would just come up with some lyrics. Here you go. And then he would rewrite them into the most poetic, beautiful, gorgeous, fucking lyrical poetry about science fiction that you've ever read. And I told him straight up, those lyrics are amazing and gorgeous and way better than what I could come up with. You really do not need to ask me for lyrics when you can do this. And he's like, well, I just don't know where to start. Like, it's easier for me to change what's there. And I get that because I'm the same way. But at the same time, it's like, what you have is so much better than what I wrote. I get that maybe I contributed to like the foundation, but like, Jesus, man, that was fun. That was a cool one. I'll shout him out specifically. That's the band Radiant Black. He's a cool guy. Those albums turned out really interesting because it's like my voice, but it's not phrased or structured how I do vocals at all. So it's like, oh, that is voice side, but it's weird. Kind of sounds like The Contortionist. He's got a really cool thing going on, but like, read those lyrics if he has them up, because like, that was not me. But they're really nice. They're really pretty. Yeah, that was a fun project to work on. I'm going to anonymously highlight some of the gigs that stand out in my mind, because like I said, I'm kind of winding down from this. I made like a good chunk of money. I got enough experience and confidence, which is what I went into it for. I think I'm still going to take on gigs for like a select handful of clients who I really like or who really pay well. But for the most part, I think I'm done just kind of taking rando gigs. So I'm going to sum up some of the more interesting ones. So there was one group who it was a guy, but he was on behalf of this band, and he shows up all guns blazing. Here's the demo. We want you to sound like Randy Blythe, like everyone says. And okay, do you want me to write the lyrics? Yes. We don't have any ideas for lyrics. Okay, what do you want them to be about? Well, you see, and then he goes on this tangent about how there was this band that they were all in, but then a few members of the band sold out and started a mainstream rock band, those fuckers, and so they left them for dead, and they wouldn't even finish this release. So that's why they had to do it all themselves and hire a vocalist. So if you can work in just some of that like raw hatred and anger, and I'm like, I can do my best. I know how metal works. I can probably write that. And then he goes, here's their Instagram for inspiration. I was like, whoa, we're past 11 now. We're going a little too hot, but of course I'm at work. What am I going to do? So I click it, and of course they're bless their hearts. They are children. They are 13 years old. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to write a fucking groove metal diss track for some teenagers who are working out their beef. In another month or two, they're probably going to be friends again, or they'll hate each other forever, like I do with some of the people I went to high school with. Doesn't matter. Not my thing. But I am 30 something, and I dare say this is above me. So I charged them the minimum amount, because keep in mind, this demo too was like a garage, no click track jam with drums and a guitar recorded with a single mono mic in a garage. And this was going to be their like, their revenge, right? And it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to write personalized lyrics about your fucking little kid friends. So I charged them the cheapest amount. I wrote some generic metal lyrics, and I threw some good old Randy Blythe vocals. I even, you know what? I double tracked them. I remember it wasn't to a click, but I recorded the main line for everything, which it was a mess, but it was fine. And then I doubled myself. So that I just matched it visually. Cause you can't line it up to the grid cause there was no grid. So that was a funny one just from the lore. That made me laugh. There was one song where this guy's like, before he hired me, he was like, hey, I've tried this with another vocalist, but it was too fast and too complicated for him. So I just like want to see if you would be able to do this. And this song was like a progressive, it was like, it was like some type of progressive. It wasn't necessarily genty, but the song itself was about a drug trip, but the vocals were just rapping, like just screamed rapping all the way through, which was really funny. And like, it was such an interesting vibe that one sticks out in my mind, because it was like this guy said his influences and it didn't sound like any of them. One of them I think was like Born of Osiris, and it didn't sound anything like them, and I was like, good on you, that's really cool. But it was a metal rap song, and I don't mean like rap metal, like it didn't sound like Limp Bizkit. It was like technical, progressive, sort of genty, but not really, almost like deathcore breakdowns with just like actual rap flow screamed over it. And that was very cool and very fun. And that song was one of the reasons I've started doing like quicker vocals. That song is indirectly responsible for the start of Calculated Brain Death. Just because I was like, hey, this was really fun. This was one of the most fun things I did. Why am I not letting myself do this? Like, I write like fucking 50 songs a year. Why am I not letting myself have this much fun? So I've started doing more fun stuff like that. And the new Ethereal Void is also like really rhythmic, which is a lot of fun. So that one stood out to me. I don't know, man. I want to talk about the one that I was talking about before with the really tough vocals, but I feel like it would be, if I say any more, it would be too singled out, because right now what I said describes a bunch of different gigs that I've had. But if I say any more, I think it's going to be too singled out. So I'm not going to do that. If you're curious about the worst Fiverr gig I've ever had, just shoot me a message on Instagram. It was really something. Yeah. Those were kind of the highlights that have stood out to me. It's very cool to see. One of the first gigs I ever got was a band that went on to like, you know, they're just starting out, garage recordings or whatever. And I did the vocals for like the first few releases, and now they're like playing shows and have endorsements, and by all accounts are doing far better than my own bands, which is funny, but it's cool to see. Like, I follow them on social media, and it's like, hey, that's fucking awesome. It's crazy that like that was one of the first Fiverr gigs I ever did, I think, was for them. And I remember when I submitted it, I was like so nervous to make sure it was good enough. And like now it's like, I don't know, I don't feel that anymore. When I do these gigs, I've taken like so many, and it's like, nah, I don't care. After like the first 5, it was like, okay, I'm probably okay. Yeah. I have one more gig that, unfortunately, I don't remember the details. I just remember the vibe, but it was this audio production class from, God, I'm so sorry. It's like Malaysia or Indonesia, like Southeast Asian somewhere. And they paid like a shit ton of money for me to just scream like a your mom joke, because the song was like 15 seconds and it was just like frog your mom, and like that was it. And it was just like a very like I wrestled a bear once, a random lol song, and like I swear it was like 15 or 30 seconds, and they paid for like the maximum order, and I was like, you can keep your goddamn money, like I don't. And so I did it in like a few different styles, I'm pretty sure, just a whole bunch of layers just for fun. But I swear it was like 5 words and half of them were just frog and the other one was your mom joke. And like it's weird to structure these gigs because like some people do it by like amount of seconds, which I get it for like if you're like doing like an R&B hook, right? And this needs to be exactly 23 seconds of chorus that you can copy paste throughout. But obviously with metal, it's not going to work like that. So I can't do it like that. And it's like you could do it based on like length of song, but it's like, okay, well, if there's going to be a 7 goddamn minute Doom song that's going to take me, you know, an hour to record, if that, versus some ridiculously technical 2.5 minute tech death song that's going to take me 3 or 4 hours. I'm not going to charge like that. And I'm also not going to like charge the like just the amount of time that the vocals are in. That's psychotic. I don't know or care, and it shouldn't matter. It matters based on the song and how many vocal seconds are in the song. Doesn't matter. I get why people charge like that, but I can't charge like that. I just do it based on song, regardless of how long. You can do a loophole. You can be like, this is my progressive one song and it's 34 minutes long. And it's actually just a full ass EP, but you can be like, it's one song and it's prog. And I'd be like, guess I'm just going to charge you for one song. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Those were some fun ones. Nothing else really stands out in my mind. For the most part, like people are pretty agreeable. I dare say I'm also fairly easy to work with. I mean, if the vocal part I think is going to be bad, like I'll do it. Unless it's really bad, I'll be like, hey, you should change this. But even if I don't like it, even if the whole time I'm recording it, I'm just being like, this is wrong, I would structure this better, I'll do it and it'll be good. Yeah. That's cool. I didn't get as many like rock gigs as I had hoped. I got a couple. It was really cool. There was one guy who, I was so sad. He's like, I made this EP and this is the last song on it, and I think your voice would be a good fit. And the vocal style and the range that we settled on was this it was clean, but it was harsh clean. It was like heavy metal. It was very dramatic, not, because I don't want to say harsh clean like Nickelback, like Hermider. It was just like this, it was this really intense, I guess, heavy metal, power metal sort of thing, but in a really good range. And I had no idea my voice could do that. And that song kind of changed everything. That's why you have more of that sort of shouty, harsh, clean style in Liturgy, because when that song was done, I turned around and I'm like, I'm going to use this. That's why Black Sanctum has that sort of style to it, because I was so happy my voice could do that. And it's crazy because he's like, yeah, I'm not really doing that many more songs. And I was like, but this is like the best thing that I've done on here. I was so upset because I was so happy with how my voice sounded. It was like the best my clean voice has sounded in a song. And he came back with one other song about a year later, and it didn't quite hit the same, it didn't use my voice in the same way. It was kind of more dynamic and more varied, and that's fine. But then he's like, all right, yeah, I'm good, I'm taking a break for at least a year. And it's like, god damn. I mean, I'm sure he's got stuff to do, but it was cool because it was like kind of sort of progressive, not really, but it was like symphonic metalish rock. It was so good. It was so cool. And he's like a bass player for whatever main band he's in, and so the bass lines were like super fucking killer. That was cool. Yeah, I'll shout him out too. That was Inevitable Doom by Scott Project, SKOT with dots in between. Not a huge fan of the name, but that song turned out like real good. I was really happy with it. I wish I could do more stuff like that. And like the crazy thing is, like, he just provided like really simple demos where he was just kind of like singing almost like I am now. He'd just be like, no redemption or sins forgiven. And I would take that and just sing it up the octave, exactly what he was doing. And then he was like, well, those are just suggestions. I can't sing. Like, don't follow what I'm doing. And it's just like, if I didn't, it wouldn't sound so good. So like his vocal writing was so on point that like I can't really do that exact same thing in my music because it just doesn't hit the same. And that was awesome because that gave me so much confidence in that vocal tone that I then tried to use it for a whole bunch of things. And I just don't really have a lot of music where it works. I'm starting to kind of a little bit push that direction in the design abstract, but it's more like I'm taking a clean tone and harshifying it a little bit so that it cuts through, as opposed to making a very harsh tone. It's pushing that direction, but it's not there yet by any means. I tried it a little bit in Voicide, but unfortunately I just don't really have that many uses for it. But yeah, it still stands out to me because it just turned out really good. Yeah, that was a nice little project. I think that about sums it up. You know, there were ups and downs. Like, it goes without saying, some customers are going to be frustrating. Some are going to be a breeze. A lot of them were a breeze. Only a handful really stand out as being like completely unreasonable. Either because they insisted on the music being a way that I thought objectively sounded bad, but I ended up just doing it anyway. Or just like the music itself being like so shitty that it was impossible to deliver any sort of thing on in a way that I was like, this is going to turn out as a okay product, you know? Like, and it's weird because like you don't know going in, right? So I've started like the first few times somebody was just like, hey, I've got a deathcore song that needs vocals, and I would be like, all right, let's get this going. And like a couple times, stupidly, when I was starting out, I took gigs before I'd even listened to the song. And then because I was just taking all gigs just on principle, anytime anyone offered, hell yes, I'll do it, and whatever it is, I'll do it. And then I'd listen to the track and I'm like, what have I done? There's no click track. It's all fucked up. There's like the drums aren't even on time, you know, and it's just like, and I would do my best, but now I'm way more picky. But yeah, there was some times where I kind of, you know, I played myself by just being like, oh, hell yeah, that sounds good. You never know just from talking to the person if it's going to be good music or if it's going to be absolutely shit, you know? I always have to hear a demo. I always have to at this point, because there's a few times where it's just like, oh my God, this is a well-spoken gentleman with just a completely incomprehensibly garbage song. Or the alternative, a lot of the best sounding ones are like ESL, like people who don't speak English primarily. And so their ideas are super hard to come across, but the music itself is amazing. And of course, those are not mutually exclusive, obviously. But it's just like, it's really hard to form an opinion without just hearing the song, because you try to base it off of every little thing. And it's just like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that was interesting. So yeah, that's what I learned. Like I said, it had its ups and downs, made a good chunk of money. I ended up being in about as many songs as my own releases. Like it's basically 1-to-1 at this point for like things that I've put out as Abstracted Records versus things I've put out, or other people have put out using my voice on Fiverr, which is kind of crazy. I was up to a lot the past couple of years, but yeah, hopefully this video is interesting or fun or whatever. Just decided to put some content that wasn't just this album fucking sucks and here's why. So yeah.